Everybody agrees that paragliding is a mental game. You ask anyone, oh yes, it's a mental game, everything is in your head, etc. But how many pilots do you really know that truly embrace this mental journey, that truly train their mind in the same way as we train ground handling or thermaling? So everything that I pointed out and everything that I wanted to happen did happen. I went a few days bivouac in Bolivia without much plan. I didn't even download all the maps for this bivouac because I never thought that I would go so far. So it was a real kind of real venturing. I was like landed somewhere in Altiplano at 4.6 at some point. I was like, I really don't know where I am. So there's no network, no maps. So it's just follow the mountains. I think the whole conversation can be summarized as like, be honest with yourself and truly honest how uncomfortable it may be. And whatever comes out of it, just follow it. And you can't go wrong.
Totally get it. And that's why I was so fascinated when we brought out the topic of honesty, because
this is one of the questions that I always ask my pilots. What's the ultimate goal? Where do you imagine yourself as a pilot in years? What type of pilot do you want to become? What truly triggers you for flying? If you can't fail and the sky is the limit, where would you like to take your flying? And it's always interesting because the answers... Before, we were mostly comparing ourselves to our village, our neighbors, our co-workers. This is why the choice of your job and work environment is so important, because it will define what you're focusing on naturally. You can't really avoid it. But now...
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everyone along with them, welcome back to Paragliding Atlas. It's that time of the week when we bring you more awesomeness related to all things paragliding. And in case you're new here, I'm your host Aninder Singh, and in case you haven't done so already, do consider smashing that like and subscribe button or dropping in a rating wherever possible. These small acts of kindness helps us bring these unfiltered and honest conversations to many more pilots out there, and ultimately making the skies a more safer and more enjoyable place to be. Now, for today's episode, I'll just be honest, because I found it super hard to put together an intro for this one. And I'll tell you the reason why. Firstly, because we live in a world where the way we interact with our very own emotions is changing at a rapid pace. If you look at the past decade or so, we have gotten so used to feeding our brains with endless stimuli, spiking our dopamine levels to a point where that kind of way of thinking is becoming the new normal. And this very shift has led many of us to present a facade of invulnerability on the outside. But deep down as humans, with our primitive brains, we all struggle to keep up with the digital age and the ever-shortening attention spans. I'm sure you can agree that we are often at odds with the very foundation of way humans interact and connect with each other. And I completely understand that this might sound a bit too philosophical to begin with, but I cannot help but think about how relationships today, be it interpersonal, be it financial or otherwise, are simply becoming more challenging than ever. And many of us, me included, find it hard to strike the little balance between such aspects of life, where we have emotions like self-doubt and other areas of life along with them, such as unfiltered honesty, is something that we all can strive to improve upon. So in today's episode, we are exploring a first of its kind of a topic, which is based on the wellness wheel section of this podcast, and that is how to build a healthy relationship with flying in your life. And I completely understand that it's a massively vast subject and there's no one way to cover all aspects of it in a single episode. But this is our small attempt here at Paragliding Atlas, featuring someone who has visualized their dreams, worked tirelessly to realize them, and found a way to strike a rewarding balance in the sport. So without further ado, if you're seeking inspiration, clarity, or just a fresh perspective on how to make flying more fun, this one's coming to you straight from Paragliding Atlas Studios, featuring Kinga Masztalerz, a one-of-a-kind pilot who truly embodies the spirit of what we also stand for in here at Paragliding Atlas, and that is to dream, believe, and achieve. So tune in, and I hope you like it. Kinga Masztalerz, thank you so much for joining us on Paragliding Atlas. It's an absolute honor to have you on the show. How is life treating you in New Zealand today?
Oh, amazing. New Zealand is always an amazing place to be, and Southern Alps is one of the most beautiful mountain playgrounds in the world. It's always nice to be here. We are in the middle of summer, long days, good flying. So nothing to complain about.
I can imagine. I am on the complete opposite side of the globe, 12 hours of time difference. But I'm just curious because when it comes to winter destinations, we often hear about the cross country paradises in South America and other places. Why does New Zealand or Australia, for that matter, not become that popular? Is it just the geographical location, or is it just the flying conditions like Scandinavia only appear once in a while and not that consistent over a period of time?
So there's a few reasons that Colombia or Mexico have become very popular destinations because the American population goes there and advertises it to the world. It's very close to them. And also the flying there, it's a little bit more straightforward and consistent. In New Zealand, we have two islands. On the north, we have rolling hills and beautiful coast. The South Island is basically Southern Alps going across for more than 1,000 kilometers. So it's a particular environment because we are on an island surrounded by a lot of water, Tasman Sea on one side and Pacific on the other. And because of this flying here, it's a little bit more complex than many other places. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's less consistent than, for example, flying in the Alps, but definitely requires a little bit more understanding and thinking about what's happening with the weather because of this proximity of the ocean. The weather can change pretty quickly. The wind systems are way more complex because we don't only have usual meteorological wind and valley winds coming through the valleys in thermic days, but also we have two sea breezes coming from west, from Tasman Sea, and from the east, from Pacific. And really, depending on the day and depending what's happening in the bigger picture in the ocean, what low-high systems develop on the Tasman Sea and anything like this, we may have very different conditions. This can be hard to grasp if you come here for a week or two as an intermediate pilot. So definitely, for example, Colombia will be probably the safer choice for a 50-hour pilot who just wants as much airtime as possible within a week of their holidays. But at the same time, when it comes to adventure and the beauty of the mountains and the wilderness and very interesting, breathtaking flying, New Zealand is really hard to beat. So it's not better or worse, just very different. And of course, New Zealand is far away from everything. The tickets are more expensive. It's quite a journey. If you come from Europe, you have 12 hours of time difference. It doesn't make much sense to come for a week. You will just get over your jet lag and then it's time to come back. It is more committing when it comes to logistics, but it's not worth it. And there are reasons why I chose it for my home and why I keep coming back here every year for the last decade.
I just love the way you explained it. It was mesmerizing hearing you talk about the beauty of that 1,000-kilometer mountain range. I was just checking out your Instagram and I was like, wow. I thought those kind of landscapes were only existing in Scandinavia or in the Himalayas. But 1,000 kilometers of an endless playground, if you know how to navigate, seems like an adventure. I can totally understand why you are choosing to be a part of.
It definitely is. And also we can talk about it more later. But what I would add here is also that Southern Alps here in New Zealand have no roads, basically. There's very few roads. So adventure flying, Volbivac mode of flying is a natural way of going through. And I fly with my Volbivac kit here for the whole season, even if I don't necessarily plan to go bivy. If I want to fly through backcountry, it's a good day, I want to fly into the mountains, it makes sense to take some basic bivy kit with you because if you land somewhere, sometimes the best decision is to land high on the slope and spend the night and fly out on the next day because depending where you are, walking out through the valley can be a very long and slow process. Some of the valleys don't even have trails, not to mention roads. But at the same time, we basically have no trees. So if it's not a glacier or vertical rock, you can topland virtually anywhere and everywhere. And this makes it a really fun playground when you just fly these mountains a little bit differently than, let's say, European Alps, where every time you land in the valley, there's a road, hotel, bus stop, railway, whatever. But this being said, you have to be very careful when landing because there are power lines and houses and limited. It's relatively easy to slope land somewhere happily because there's plenty of space. You don't have to be precise in it. But then getting out may be a whole other adventure.
I love the anecdote that you had at the end. What I was curious is, how's the wildlife scenario if you get stuck out in the wilderness for a couple of days? So how much danger do you have from wild animals that can catch you off guard in case you're by yourself?
In New Zealand, the birds stopped flying because they had no one to run away from. There's no dangerous animals here. Our national bird kiwi stopped flying and lays eggs on the ground until the English came with their dogs, cats, rats, and weasels. There were virtually no predators here. The biggest threat you can encounter is a kia, our native mountain parrot. Are incredibly smart and cheeky. If they see you landing somewhere, they will come and you see this head popping from behind the rock. And then you have to be careful because they love to steal things. If you leave your, socks to dry, they will just steal it and then bounce away a few meters and laugh at you. And you're like, give it back. And like, no, I don't need your sock, but I will just enjoy the play. So it's always very special to encounter and have interactions with them because it's this type of wildlife that you don't really encounter anywhere else. This very, very curious, very cheeky, very smart bird that also has no fear because they never learned, they never evolved to be afraid of anything or anyone. So all the encounters that you can have with the wildlife in New Zealand are very special and very beautiful and not dangerous at all. You don't have to be worried about any predators or anything trying to eat you or hurt you, which is, again, another reason why all the venturing through the New Zealand backcountry is so much fun. It's very safe. Also, New Zealand itself is very safe. People are super friendly and it's very easy when you finally get to the road to hitch back home or to your car, and people are extremely helpful. There's a lot going for New Zealand. If you're considering it, maybe next northern winter, it may be a sign to come to New Zealand for some flying and adventures.
So for all our listeners wondering, if you ever get tired of the crowded jungles and the course lines in Colombia or Brazil, you know where to head. For all the pristine nature, but do carry an extra pair of socks because they might get stolen when you land somewhere.
Exactly.
Got it. Kinga, I was watching your YouTube channel, and 9 years ago you uploaded a video saying paragliding in China. And lately you were uploading some reels about paragliding in Peru. So from China to Peru, how has the journey been? If you can catch up our viewers. How many years have you been in the game and the amount of hours if you're comfortable? Because I think years only tell part of the story, but the hours
Absolutely.
is the real thing. So if you can tell me that a little bit.
So I started flying a little more than a decade ago. When I discovered paragliding, it was immediate love at first flight. I dove headfirst all in. It was never truly a weekend hobby for me. I never had a period when I would fly on weekends. I was working for a marketing agency as a strategist for commercial campaigns. It was all good. But once I discovered paragliding, within a couple of months, I quit it and I moved to Bassano del Grappa. And for next year, I was flying, living off savings that I basically didn't really have. So living off a credit card. And trying to figure out how to maybe start making money of it at some point. That means that from the very first year I was flying, in the first year of my flying, when I still was learning to thermal and basically bombing out in every field, when you stand in Bassano on the takeoff Tapeti and you look in front on the flatlands, basically every field you can point out, I probably landed there. This is how I learned Italian, hitching back with locals and trying to communicate with them. So within my first year, I flew 300 hours just learning to thermal, which is quite an achievement to do in your first year because flights are short. So you have to really keep trying, keep pushing and fly every possibility. Since then, I've been flying around 400, sometimes more than 400 hours per year. So it would come now to around 4,000 hours, I assume. As much as you said that years don't necessarily explain, also at some point airtime stops really saying so much about your flying, because at the beginning, you can't cheat it. You need airtime. You need to spend time in the air. You need to feel comfortable. You need to develop muscle memory for thermaling, for looking around, for observation, and for handling your wing. But also there's a moment when you can just get stuck in what I call stupid airtime. You just fly the same hill all the time on the same lines. There's nothing wrong about it, but it's a very different way of flying and progressing into paragliding that if you, on the other hand, go to different places and try to fly from different takeoffs in various conditions and travel around and are not afraid to try things and not only follow the gaggle or follow your friends, but also try to do things alone and not being afraid to bomb out and walk or hitchhike back or take a train or whatever. But you can see that after a few hundred hours, this is what makes a massive difference and what makes some pilots fly these interesting, inspiring lines that we all like to see from the majority that will fly the same hill or the same soaring side forever. And again, there's nothing wrong about any of it. We all come to paragliding and look for various things. Sometimes it can be really pushing boundaries of the sport and doing things and flying lines that no one has flown before. Sometimes it may be chilling after a day of work on the beautiful coast in calm, laminar conditions. And there's nothing wrong with any of it. It's just really being honest about what we are looking for in flying and what we want from it. So I've always wanted it, but it took me quite a few years to really define it. What is my reason for flying? But now for a few years, I know that there are basically two things that inspire me and make it worth for me. It's beauty and adventure. Once I realized this, I also realized that for me, personally, blind chasing kilometers doesn't necessarily mean as much as going to beautiful places and fly some very scenic lines and going deep in the mountains, because this usually means both beauty and adventure. So if I have a choice to fly some Milky Way for kilometers, and we all know that in every place there are lines that just give on a given day. You go to a particular place in the Alps and there will be 100 other pilots who want to fly 200-kilometer triangle on this day, and we all go for it like a goggle, and it almost feels like competition flying. And again, nothing wrong about it. This actually can be a really cool experience to fly with your friends, fly with others, fly very fast and very efficiently and break your personal best. But this type of flying, after a few years, I realized that it's not really something that I remember afterwards. It's something that, okay, I ticked off X amount of kilometers, but it wasn't really anything life-changing. So yeah, probably around 4,000 hours now, maybe more. And a lot of different places, a lot of different lines, a lot of different mountains all around the world. You ask about China. When I went to China, it was a little bit of spontaneous decision for various reasons. I was a very fresh pilot. I don't even think I was flying for 2 years, probably less. So it was an adventure and very interesting. As a paragliding trip and cultural trip, China is a pretty intense place altogether. It's huge. So it feels like you are immersed in the completely different universe, and comparing it to, but it's really hard to compare it to, for example, this year's April, May in Peru and Bolivia, because when I went to Peru and Bolivia this year, I was a very different pilot. I was more self-sufficient and had much more experience than this years ago. And I flew various places alone. And then later, the couple of friends that I met there for weeks, I ventured with my gear through Peru, for example, basically pointing, oh, this volcano looks great. Let's try to fly over it, and just making it happen. Everything that I pointed out and everything that I wanted to happen did happen. I went to a few days bivouac in Bolivia without much plan. I didn't even download all the maps for this bivouac because I never thought that I would go so far. So it was a real kind of real venturing. I was like landed somewhere in Altiplano at 4.6 at some point. I was like, I really don't know where I am. So there's no network, no maps. So it's just follow the mountains. I broke a Bolivian distance record on this particular bivouac. It was only just above 100 kilometers, but the terrain is so wild and unexplored. Suddenly you do things that are truly new, not only new for you, which is always exciting. Doesn't matter if someone did it. If it's new for you, it's always exciting. But here you're flying virgin terrain that's very complicated, very committing. And just to make it happen, of course, it felt natural and felt right. We can come back to it because I really believe that what feels right in paragliding, does it feel right? It's a very important question that we should all ask ourselves all the time. But it felt right and it felt relatively easy because I had this thousands of hours and dozens of places and lines flown in different places before. So yeah, very different trips to compare.
I love the way you explain it. I can see the excitement you have with respect to the topic, and no wonder 4,000 hours. That's like, these kind of numbers are only heard in commercial aviation. Pre-flight and that to paragliders. I rarely come across people who do that. And the ones who do are the ones who are famous on Instagram and Facebook with all the Red Bull logos and everything around them.
It's really hard. Paragliding is such a weather-dependent sport, and it's a dependent sport, and so difficult if you have normal life and Monday, Friday, 9-5 job, and maybe family and other obligations. It's so hard to have so much airtime. This is why I always admire pilots who keep chasing it. There's plenty of pilots who chase it hard, having all this life on the ground and finding time through much organization and good relationships, both at work and in the family. It's always very inspiring. But yes, to fly year after year, hundreds of hours, you basically need to make it your life. It's very hard to do it otherwise.
Yeah, I think only a handful of pilots, regardless of how motivated they are ever able to get more than 100 hours in the first year of flying.
That's true. That's pretty unique. But this is something that I don't even know if I'm proud of it. It just shows how absolutely committed and in love I was with the sport when I started flying, because it's like nothing. If there's the moments of madness in your life, then can define it. So that was a moment of madness because I really didn't think it through very well. My heart ruled the decision of moving to Italy and flying, making this first year fully focused on flying. It wasn't a very obvious decision, but it simplified everything dramatically because we all have this list of priorities in our life, and some things matter more, some things matter less. At this point, there was paragliding, and then there was like long break, and then there were other things. So any decisions in my life for this first year were very simple because I was like, does it help my flying? Is it good for my flying? Yes, let's do it. No, okay, it's not good. So it's really interesting how it may not be the easiest thing to do, but in some ways it was very simple. It simplified a lot of things at this point. But of course, it's not sustainable. I don't believe that you can have only flying in your life and care only about this. You need other things in your life to balance everything. You can't wrap everything about your flying or any other passion for this matter. That's not only unhealthy for your life as a whole, but also sooner or later will burn you out. We all go through ups and downs in our flying. It's never a smooth journey. There are always moments when you are the king or queen of the world, and then from hero to zero very quickly. Maybe you get scared. Maybe you see someone get hurt. Maybe one of your friends have a bad incident or accident. There are always some setbacks, and how we rebuild from them, it's really dependent of the quality of our life and the quality of our mental balance that we have also outside of flying. If we have good people in our life, if we have other things, that flying doesn't define us as a whole. We are more than this. Yeah.
These are deep talks. We could have a whole episode based on the psychology of flying.
I really believe we don't talk about it enough. Everybody agrees that paragliding is a mental game. You ask anyone, oh yes, it's a mental game. Everything is in your head, etc. But how many pilots do you really know that truly embrace this mental journey, that truly train their mind in the same way as we train ground handling or thermaling? Sooner or later, our limitation in flying won't be technical. It won't be a wing that we need to upgrade. It won't be a physical fitness to stay in the air for long enough. It will be our mindset. If we can be consistent, focused, centered, balanced, push with safety and progression, if we can rebuild after setbacks, if we can manage our anxiety and fear that develops at some point, all these things are truly fully mental. I had, after first year of my flying, actually within my first year, because I was flying so much, everything was happening like in a speedy version of usual progression. Within my first spring, I was already almost at 200 hours. because I was flying very intensively the whole autumn and winter, maybe 160, 170 hours at this point. At this point, I believed that I was already very experienced pilot because I was flying in Bassano whole winter and autumn. For those of you who don't know, it's one of the very few places in Europe where you can fly in winter in thermic conditions. This is very particular environment, which is like where the wintry conditions are warmed up by the sea and the flatlands in front of it. You are in the mountains, in Pedemontana, at the edge of Italian Alps, but also it doesn't necessarily feel like mountains. There's no valley crossings. The wind is always coming from the flatlands. If it's coming from the back, you just don't fly. Especially in autumn and winter, it's very gentle and it's very scratchy, very, very low, very slow thermals. After flying for whole autumn and winter in these conditions, I became pretty efficient in them. I started believing that I'm such a good pilot already. And only in this place, only in these conditions. And then the spring came. My first April was very explosive. The conditions changed and I decided, oh, Bassano, I'm bored with it. I'm going to the Swiss Alps in April. So I crashed on a tree and there's a lot happening there. Within 2 weeks of April, I had quite a few incidents that I was very lucky that I walked away from. And I made a lot of bad decisions based on my hunger for flying, but basically no clue what I was truly doing. And so it was like a typical intermediate syndrome of steroids plus the spring conditions on top of it. And I got really scared. I realized that there's a lot of things that I don't know. I developed this massive mistrust toward my decisions. So I kid you not, for next almost 2 years, I was basically flying, constantly questioning myself and asking, okay, that all seems all right, but what if I'm doing something so stupid and something horrible will happen? It can be really exhausting to fly like this without any trust into your decisions. And digging myself out of it took studies in sports psychologists and millions of books and talks and meditations and you name it. So when I work with pilots and coach them, we mostly focus on flying and going to beautiful places and flying their first 100 kilometers or particular mountains or going for bivy into a beautiful place. But more often than not, the most important things happen on the ground when we can talk things through and give them some framework to manage whatever they're dealing with. We all deal with something because I like to say that we fly the way we live. If we have any type of anxiety, very strong inner critic, put a lot of pressure on ourselves, if you are perfectionist, if you are over-analyzing things on a daily basis, etc., if we have very low self-esteem, or if you are too cocky, too confident, in the real life, there are traits that we can hide or manage or blame others or pretend that they are not so important. But when we fly, they will really come out and rule our flying and rule our safety or rule our performance. So in some ways, we fly the way we live, but also in another way, this flying and managing it and looking honestly into our flying can also be a pretty interesting journey that can positively affect also our life on the ground and our relationships and our work ethics and discipline and anything else. So that's fascinating. I'm pretty passionate about it because I think we still don't quite talk about it enough in paragliding. We focus too much on how to thermal the most precise way, which is of course very important, and technical part of flying is super important, but also we shouldn't forget about this mental side of it.
The reason I didn't stop you was because it was music to my ears, listening.
Right.
Somebody in our sport is like, hey, we have to talk about this because this is something that a lot of us think about, but people are in different stages of their life or they have different motivation to be open about it or a platform or something. So if somebody of your stature is coming out and speaking like this, because I've always felt that usually when I go to, I've met instructors, a lot of them are like, yes, we can teach you how to pull the brake to the right pressure point or how to push the bar correctly. But nobody talks about the psychological aspect of things. And that is, I'm so glad I reached out to you because this is exactly the topic that I wanted to speak about. And talking about priorities, Kinga, I know that I'm going to be breaking your thought process for a second, but I really want to backtrack because your journey started here as I was checking the About Us section on your website, where you said that before aviation came into your life, you were a Master of Science in Physics and pursuing a PhD in solid state spectroscopy, if I was saying it correctly. That seems like a tongue twister.
Yeah.
How does a PhD candidate have the guts and the courage leave this comfort of whatever money that is coming in and manifest something that is totally uncertain. I mean, I know the pull, I know the fascination that you have for aviation, but if you can talk to our listeners about the thought process that was strong enough to pull you out of the comfort zone that you had of a career in physics and then chase this completely, something else which was super exciting and super rewarding.
So I always wanted to become a physicist. Since I was 10, I always wanted to discover the mysteries of nature. Now I think I simply chose my specialization a little bit, unfortunately, because the solid state physics, as much as it's pretty interesting, is basically about how the world, how the matter around us works on a very, very microscopic level, what's happening there on the electron level. I didn't quite appreciate that when I'll get into actual research on my PhD. I already knew it more or less when I was doing my master thesis, that because I chose spectroscopy, it means that basically you need the laboratory, and this laboratory has to be pretty dark, away all the other types of radiation, including visible light. So in practice, what it means that you're spending your life in a dark basement. As much as the topic itself is interesting, this kind of lifestyle was never really my thing. And at some point, I just lost passion for it. I left my PhD. I never finished it. I bought one-way tickets to Asia at this point. I wasn't a pilot. I was a very keen rock climber. So all my life outside of physics was wrapped around climbing. At some point, you get into this diet and microcycles and macrocycles and training and holiday plans, and all your friends are basically connected to climbing. So it was a big part of my life. So I bought one-way ticket, went to India, then went to Thailand for climbing, then came back, got a corporate job, which was very well paid. And I absolutely hated it. So I didn't last long. Then in a big business consulting company and started working for a marketing agency. And all this, I knew that paragliding existed, but I never, and until now, a lot of people who are not connected to free flying still think the same way about paragliding, because once a few years back I was at Lago di Garda, the famous rock climbing spot, and on the rest day I hiked Monte Baldo. And again, for those of you who don't know, it's Lago di Garda and Monte Baldo it's a famous SIV and acro place. Plenty of pilots come to train over water. And that's what I saw. I just saw all these pilots taking off and flying over the lake, and then you just lose sight of them. So I guess it's nice. You don't have to hike down. You can just fly down. Maybe when I'm retired, when I can't climb anymore, because obviously climbing is so much cooler than just flying off. It also seemed really grumpy until now. I know that they were probably stressed before the SIV, yeah? But they all seemed really serious. And I was like, it doesn't look like so much fun. They don't look like they're having too much fun. Maybe one day I'll try. So that was my concept of paragliding for a few years. And then I was training pretty hard for my rock climbing. And I fell off a boulder. In a weird way, I injured my elbow a little bit, ripped a, Not even totally, just needed a few months of break without climbing. I was devastated because my life is climbing. What can I do? So because my body was so used to training, I started running a lot. And this is basically how I got into endurance sports. I progressed from running a few kilometers to 5 to 15 every morning. I was a little bit obsessive. And when I get into something, I really get into it. It ended up with some ultramarathons and then Red Bull mix-ups at the end. But something was missing. I was very fit, but very unhealthy, both physically and emotionally and mentally. Then a friend of mine just did a paragliding course and said, you should try to do it. It's pretty fun. And there was like a long weekend or some Easter or whatever. And I was like, I have nothing else to do. I can't climb, unfortunately, so I'll do my paragliding course. And from the very first moment, you hike this little hill, a training hill, and go with your paraglider and then fly over it. These first flights are not even flights, they're like little hops. You're a few meters above the ground. But for me, the concept that you can actually hike with a backpack and open this piece of cloth and fly with it, it just blew my mind. Something ticked that was like, okay, so you can actually do these things. It gives you freedom in it. And then the rest is history. I moved to Bassano. My first thermal in Bassano, finally, without falling out of it. I was alone in the thermal, in the cloud base. I landed with tears in my eyes. It was some mystical experience for me. From this moment, I was completely hooked. I was like, oh my God, that's the most beautiful thing ever. I finally was flying. I wasn't just slowly falling. I wasn't jumping like kite surfing, just up and down or whatever. I was actually climbing using force of nature to this invisible element of air to go up and go somewhere with it. It completely blew my mind. And since then, I've been chasing it pretty hard. I like to say that flying in some ways saved me because I was in a very dark place when I started flying, and it really healed my soul. It proved to me that if there is so much beauty, so much magic that you can have, it feels almost unreasonable to be sad, if it makes sense. Or it feels almost stupid not to chase it and not to try to get this feeling as much as possible. So in some ways, it was addictive from this first turmoil.
I completely believe you. That was the case with me, although I cannot boast about having 300 hours in the first year. I think I had 60 or something. But one thing that comes to my mind, Kinga, is that you are a very honest person when it comes to sharing. And from what I see on your website, it's all written out very transparently, where you don't hide your mistakes, the hiccups that have come across as you shared your Bassano or the Switzerland adventure that you had, Swiss Alps that you had in the April. So being honest is something that is super important in our lifestyles at various stages, and it helps being honest. Let's say if you were training too much, you have to be honest and say that regardless of how much effort I'm putting, it is being counterproductive. And same honesty is very important when it comes to chasing airtime, that regardless of how much risk I am chasing, this is becoming too much to handle and I should pull back. Has there been something with you that has helped you stay honest with yourself and eventually, which I can see has reflected in shaping you who you are of today? Because I see a lot of pilots, including me, it's very hard to admit your mistakes. It's very hard to say that, yes, I messed up and I should not be doing it again, or I will not do that again. How have you navigated that aspect of life during all these years from the beginning to now?
It's a very interesting question. No one actually asked me this question before. I don't believe that it's even possible to truly fly for years sustainably and not get burnt out, not lose the passion, just constantly find joy in it if you are not honest with yourself. Like, we can lie as much as we want, but flying will just show us who we are. And it doesn't matter all the narratives that we create in our daily life, all the masks that we wear to show maybe at work or maybe to potential partners who we want to be, doesn't matter because you fly and it immediately shows you who you are. All your insecurities, all your false narratives, all your wannabe stories that will all come out. And we are very vulnerable out there. We are very exposed, not only to elements, but also to consequences of our decisions. So if we are not honest about it to ourselves, because it's not only we always think about being honest to others, but first of all, it's about being honest to ourselves, we really can't progress in a safe and sustainable manner. And I think we all have met these pilots who will always, for example, find excuses. Oh, what happened? Why did you land? Oh, it was really turbulent. And you're like, it wasn't. But I know that you're flying the super hot wing. Maybe it's not the great wing for you at this point, but instead of addressing it, instead of addressing your anxiety or fear or whatever else, you are just finding excuses that the conditions weren't great, or just it's a wing, or it's a phase of the moon or anything else. So it's really, without addressing our emotion, it's really hard to go anywhere, in my opinion. And again, it doesn't mean that we all need to dig in this and our mindset and emotions again and again. We are all wired differently. So we process things in different ways. Some people need to talk things through and then they can truly think through them. Some people need to think them through, hide in the cave, and then they can express what's bothering them or what's important, what not. So we process things differently. I definitely process through talking. And within this life of journeys, I talked about paragliding a lot. And I'm very privileged to have a very good partner in life who truly understands what I do and what's important for me and listens and always has a good input when I need it. So we like to think about paragliding as this lonely journey, but it doesn't have to be. We all need other humans. If you have someone who cares about you or someone who understands what all this journey is about, and it may be, of course, is the easiest if you're talking to other paragliding pilot, but it may be also someone who knows you very well, who doesn't have to be a pilot, or someone who has a background in other sports like whitewater kayaking, rock climbing, or mountaineering. If you have someone that you can honestly talk things through, for me, that's always very important and very helpful. And the first time you do it, the first time you encounter some setback, it takes a lot to process it because you don't have tools yet to be vulnerable and honest and find this constructive solution to it. But every next time, and there will be next times, because every time we think, oh, now I have it all sorted. I went through my intermediate syndrome. Now it's all sorted. No, it's not. If you keep growing with the sport and keep progressing and keep challenging yourself, you'll always encounter new challenges and new setbacks and new issues that you will have to process. But every next time will be easier because you already developed tools and you know who you are and what you want from the sport and what the dynamics of the sport is. It's actually pretty interesting because I mentioned that my first setback, my intermediate syndrome, was pretty brutal on me on various ways. And it took me basically 2 years of, a couple of years of struggle and constant feeling like maybe I should quit the sport because I wasn't flying as well. I wasn't committed. I was afraid. I was constantly questioning myself. It was exhausting. So maybe I need a break. So I won't fly for a few days. But then I was staring at the sky thinking, oh, I should be flying. It was exhausting. It took me a long time of constant processing and reading and learning and meditating and talking about it to process it and to reconnect fully to flying. Not even reconnect, just connect in a new level to it. Because you never come back to this. If you process something like this, you never come back to where you started. You jump to the next level. We like to think that's a linear progression. The more we fly, the more we put into it, the better we fly. But it never is. It's more like some crazy drunk sinusoid. You take 2 steps forward and 1 step back and then completely plateau for a while. And there's a lot happening on the way. This being said, now after all these years, a few weeks ago, I had a really unexpected and very brutal collapse, which was the ugliest collapse I actually encountered within this 4,000 hours. For years, since flying two-liners, nothing like this happened to me. I was flying in the lee side, which itself is no-go, I know, but also mountain flying happens in the lee side often, and the big art of mountain flying is to understand which lee sides are acceptable and which lee sides are bad. So this one was surprisingly strong, surprisingly ugly and very sharp. I was getting out of it and on the edge, I got a big collapse. I was very close to the terrain. It went in total rotation and my muscle memory, my reaction saved me from some bigger drama. However, I did crash landed on the terrain. Yeah. It's not that I opened it and flew away. It's also not that I got hurt. I walked away from it. But that was definitely way closer than anyone should come. If you touch the terrain when you didn't plan to, that's obviously a very close call. And it shook me in various ways, especially because I started feeling more comfortable within the last years and because I didn't really expect it to happen with such a force. So the sport has a constant tendency of every time you feel too comfortable or too complacent or confident, it will just slap you in the face like, hey, we'll show you your place. And this is something I needed to process a little bit to regain the trust to myself, to the wing, which of course wasn't the wing's fault. It was my fault, but reconnect to not to be too sketchy. But this took a few days, not a few years. If something like this happened when I was a 50-hour pilot, I would need way longer to get over it. So what I'm trying to say here is that these setbacks and better or worse moments will keep happening. Everyone that tells you that they have it all sorted, that never get scared, that never even like everything, they have it all sorted, basically. They either lie or they are just don't push themselves in various ways. So they always fly deep within their comfort zone. Again, nothing wrong about it, but also there's not much learning or progression happening there at this point. And or they are just waiting for their next mishap to happen. Every time we say, I have it all sorted, nothing can touch me. Every time we start feeling untouchable, the sport will show us that we are very much touchable and very much mortal. There's nothing tragic about it. It's just a beauty of life, going deep into the philosophical theme. But also it's not something that should stop us from doing something that we love.
Jeez, I'm at loss of words. I think I need to compile all of this and let the listeners do the same a little bit. It's mesmerizing hearing a top-level pilot being so honest. A lot of people in today's world don't share things as transparently as you do. And that was the whole point of bringing out Paragliding Atlas podcast, that we as community do not share or talk about difficult topics as much as we talk about fun or talk topics. So that was the whole point, that we really need to start being open about this.
Yes, and also it doesn't mean that it's all struggle and difficult choices and meditation every morning. Of course, there's like majority of flying is just pure joy. That if you are in a good place in your flying, you may think, what is she even talking about? I'm totally enjoying my flying without all this BS. But sooner or later, most of us go through some darker patch, and then we truly appreciate, oh, okay, so this is what happened. This is the moment when I had to take a step back, be honest, talk to someone I trust, and restart slowly. Maybe if I'm really scared, maybe fly only in the mornings, only in the evenings, only in the place. Or maybe I need to downgrade my wing, come back to a B wing or A wing or whatever, just to refine this joy of flying. Because at the end, we all want to have fun out there. And the sport is potentially dangerous or risky, especially if we do some dumb stuff. It's expensive. It's very time consuming. It can be stressful. It takes time from your other obligations in life. So it's a very committing sport. And if it's not fun, what's the point? What are we trying to prove here? The point is that sometimes to make it fun, we need to take a step back and go through some uncomfortable journeys. And we shouldn't be afraid of it. And we shouldn't be ashamed of it in any way. That's the only thing, yeah.
Yeah, and I think with the reducing attention spans due to social media, I see in Spotify analytics where I host my podcast, a lot drop out in the first 10 minutes. So anybody who has stuck so far is definitely understanding what we are saying, because first of all, they know what is the essence of pushing the comfort zone, is where the smile really starts coming onto your face, because comfort zone is exciting for the first few days, but after that, it's the most boring place to be in life or in the air or on the ground, wherever you think so. Well, there's
in the way we all search for flow, don't we? And the flow only this magical moment when we know that we are doing something exciting, feel fully focused and present, and it pushes us, but also it doesn't create this anxiety. So we're all looking for flow in life. And if you once experience it, it's very addictive. But to experience it again and again, you can't chase it recklessly, because this is where we put ourselves in trouble. But also, you don't want to live without it if you experience it. And to experience it again, we need to constantly expand our comfort zone, try new things and do new things. So yeah, here's to a lot of flow in 2025.
This is so nice. I think I'm going to use this as a tagline of my show, a lot of flow in 2025. Yeah. Kinga, I was going to save this topic for a little bit later in the show, but I think we have just reached a point where I feel super comfortable asking about this. Paragliding is something, as you said, it takes a lot. Not just from you, it takes a lot from your money, from your bank account, from your social life. It's an investment, and it's equally rewarding. I'm not denying, like 7 or 8 billion on the planet, and a handful of them chase airtime in collapsible wings, and a handful of them push their comfort zone. The lucky few of us who are blessed enough to chase airtime like this do find ourselves in situations where our support system does not understand what we're doing. Support system as in like close friends and family. Finding our own tribe is a whole different struggle, because obviously you have to move geographically to different societies, to different countries, to invest in visas and monetary situations and everything. A lot of times it's very easy to say, no matter what comes, I'm going to go back to my passion and let it fulfill my life. Now, the thing with that is, regardless of how rewarding it might sound, there are very easy ways to become a loner in the sport while chasing your passion at the highest level. Because you want to chase your 100, 200 hours. You can't convince a friend who flies to give up his lifestyle and his support system And then you're like, all right, then I might as well do it by myself. So when you're doing this by yourself, because that is the only option life has given you, it's either that or lowering your expectations or giving up, which of course is not a point if you're chasing it that hard. How does one navigate their challenges when chasing the pinnacle of their dream by themselves and not having anybody to talk to?
Well, it's not a very interesting question that no one has ever asked. That's a very good one, actually. There's a few approaches to it because we're wired differently. Not everyone's looking for the same thing in life and in flying. There are people who are very heavily community driven. And for them, flying with, you know that you're this type of person, if the best flights you can think of were flights with your friends, flying as a little gag or as a team, going somewhere and doing something together. This is pretty obvious. You're a pilot, you're aware that flying is in some way lonely sport, because at the end, even if you're surrounded by friends, you're an aircraft in the air. So whatever is happening, it's your decisions and your responsibility, but you are driven by sharing this experience with others. There are people driven by adventure or beauty, in my case. There's a very distinctive type of pilots who are very competitive. If it's a World Cup or your local club on Sunday, if you outfly your friend in a friendly competition, you are the happiest camper out there. We all, in some ways, look for different things, and it can drive the way you find your tribe. Few ways of approaching it. On one hand, I believe that if you show who you are out there, if you do your thing, and in some ways it was my case that when I started flying, I had people around me in Bassano. There's a lot of pilots, and I had good weekend mentors that would suggest something when I was a beginner or give me some advice from their perspective. It's good to have people around you and bounce your experience of them. But in some ways, I was really driven so much by flying that I wasn't looking for a community, if it makes sense. I was always a little bit of a loner. I was alone when I started flying. I was alone when I moved to France from Italy because I didn't want to fly in Bassano anymore. I had enough of it, but Swiss Alps in April was a little bit too much. So I moved to France for summer. And sooner or later, when you follow your passion, your tribe organically finds you, if it makes sense. So it's not so much that you desperately trying to find your tribe, but your tribe will find you. And like-minded pilots or like-minded humans will naturally connect with who you are. It's a little bit like be yourself, because otherwise the people who are looking for you won't be able to find you. By being honest, vulnerable, and chasing whatever is important for you, I believe that we are just naturally getting closer to other like-minded people who are looking for similar things. Of course, it's a little bit different when you are talking about already existing tribe of your family or friends who don't understand flying, who don't connect to it in any way and can't really understand why you justify the risk you take or all the time that you spend doing it, if it's really worth it, who are trying to maybe blame you there's just put you into kind of this guilt state for not spending enough time with them. And this is extremely tricky because it all depends at the end. It would be nice to say if they truly care about you, they will understand at least what you're saying. But in reality, we are coming from different backgrounds and have different types of tribes around us. So they may still truly not understand why you do what you do. This is very tricky because in some way, life is really about compromise and priorities. If at this point, your family's happiness is something that you can't sort out or can't solve in a different way, then something has to give. Maybe flying has to give for this period of time. Or maybe the family has to be sat down and truly explained what it's all about. Maybe they need to understand how beautiful and special is what you are doing. Maybe they need a little bit of connection to why you find it so special. Maybe you need to tone down the risk-taking to keep them happy but still enjoy the flying. So it is a very complex topic. For me, when I started flying, it was all easy. I had no children, no husband, no partner. My mom has never truly understood what I'm doing out there. Until she flew tandem, I think she never truly connected a few years later. Why would I, again, find another sport that takes you even higher? You can fall from even higher altitude. Why would you do something like this? Of course, it's easier when you have no obligations holding you back. You can just jump into it. From this perspective, it's easy for me to say, you will do what you want to do. And this is literally what I was doing. For the first year, I was chasing it so hard, nothing else mattered. Of course, I met a lot of great people on the way. But if the flying was better somewhere else, if the season I would just leave it all behind. Flying had a priority. As we said at the beginning, there was flying and then anything else. And in some ways, it sounds almost heartless. But at the same time, we all have to be very honest what's on our top of our priority list at this point and what's in second and third place. So I didn't it is sometimes the prices that you create some friendships and meet your people, and then it all dissipates because you chase something else at this point, or they chase something else at this point. But I really believe that if you show yourself out there and be vulnerable and honest about your flying and about what you want from it, the more honest you are, the more your tribe will find you very organically. So again, I don't know if it really explains it because it's a very complex topic and it's really heavily dependent on your situation. It's very different when you're coming from some very traditional and risk-averse background and your family absolutely hates the concept of you flying paragliders. And it's very different when you are like 20-something and no obligations, no family, no job. Even better, then you have to sort out how to pay for all this. But other than this, you have all the freedom to do as you wish and find your tribe organically. At this point, I've been migrating for a few years with trips to different places like Peru and Bolivia that you mentioned. But I've been migrating between New Zealand, Europe, and Indian Himalayas for years now. Each of these places has a tribe and my people. But India is very particular because we only go for a few weeks. We reconnect with dear friends that we deeply care about, honest, beautiful friendships. We go flying together and have heaps of fun. Then we don't see each other for the rest of the year. So yeah, it all has its price and its space.
I think this is a question that everybody has to find an answer for themselves, no matter.
But also because we are all different and we have different situations and different priorities. So in some ways, to answer this question, everyone needs to ask themselves what's truly important for me. And there's a bunch of very important questions that I answered multiple times, but also sometimes I give my pilots very basic, very important questions. For example, who am I? What do I want? What am I afraid of? What's important? And these are questions that are so basic that when I ask you, what's important for you? And in there, you will probably say, but what do you mean? Or what do you want? In flying, private life, or work? Because we create different narratives and want a lot of things. When you give it true space, I like to do it in particular on solo missions. So you spend a day, 2 days somewhere in the woods, alone. I like to fast, going into some more extreme ways of finding your groove and flow. Then you don't have any distractions. The point is to get away from all the distractions. If you can, for a day or two, my first solo was 3 days. That was pretty hardcore, 72 hours in the forest without food. It can be a few hours. It can be 15 minutes of yoga and then answering these questions. Just giving your mind a bit of space and lack of distractions, because we live our lives in such a, you mentioned social media, we are constantly distracted. We are constantly telling or listening to stories, talking, writing, scrolling, listening to things. No one sits and drinks their coffee anymore without doing anything else. We have to read something, we have to watch something. So our brain didn't evolve to do this. So we are constantly overwhelmed and overloaded with information and narratives. To give yourself a few hours, maybe a day without distractions, give your mind space to wander, get bored, and then answer this very basic question, suddenly it really jumps at you. Suddenly you know exactly what's important. You know exactly what you want. You don't create narratives. It just comes up at you. There are very basic questions, too basic to answer them. For example, what do you want? And then, bam, here it is, because there's too much noise around us. But also, once we honestly answer these questions, we can navigate things like the question you ask. how to find a compromise between your passion for flying and a family that doesn't understand or accept it. And it can be something pretty surprising. But the answer will be different for everyone, because every situation and every human is different. Yeah.
I think the takeaway was just sitting with your own thoughts and cleaning out the distractions for some time. That is the wonder drug, which I kid you not, will be sold in pharmacies in time to come in some way or the other, because the amount of
it's an
interaction
incredible, powerful tool.
Indeed. There's no way I want to stop on this topic, but we have to move on for the sake of the show. I quickly want to touch upon the topic of materialistic wealth, Kinga, because that is something all of us have to answer at some point in time. Gliders are getting more expensive than ever. I think I was just speaking with a sailplane pilot, and he was telling me the amount of money he spends per hour if he chases airtime for about 60 to 100 hours was a bit cheaper than the amount of money I was spending as a paraglider pilot. Chasing the same amount of airtime. Yeah, I'm not, I kid you not, because they're renting the planes. They're not buying the planes. And
but still you need to rent. So basically you pay per hour for tow, for rental, etc.
Please do not quote me on this to any of my listeners. But all I'm saying is the price point was...
It's expensive. The sport is expensive. That's true. We all know it.
Yeah. So let's say the beginning years for anyone. This is not just for you or me or for Kriegel, Maurer or any of the top line pilots, but anybody who's starting such an expensive sport is going to face the question of money at some point in time, either on the first year or second year or the fifth year. Before finally Red Bull and all of these big companies started associating with you and there was a way forward, how were you managing the materialistic side of things when you were chasing solely your passion?
Poorly.
Jeez, I love your honesty, Kinga. You're a podcast who's brave, if I have to be honest.
Poorly.
Right, we all do. We just want to know, how did you do it and still make it so that we can follow your footsteps?
With being in debt, seasonal work, and prioritizing pretty heavily. So we were, for our first few years since I met my partner, we met in Annecy. It was basically after my first year of flying. He originally brought me to New Zealand. He's a New Zealander, he's Kiwi, born and raised. And in New Zealand...
Does he fly as well?
He does fly. So it's always a little bit easier, I would say, that, let's say, double income or single income at times, or two half incomes, and no mortgages, no kids, no other aspects. You can live pretty cheaply. We've been living together, or I've been living alone from van for years. He's been traveling in the van and living on the van and wild camping somewhere in the bushes. This year, I got a house in Italy. Now we'll have a base. And so big house, so it will need a little bit of TLC, tender loving care. The house is between Feltre and Bassano, basically. So there's plenty of beautiful places around that you can fly and just fly new places, new conditions with different types of pilots and learn more within the same time. So that's one of the concepts. But coming back to not a big business, just a little bit to make this life sustainable. But also a big part of it, from my perspective, it's always been easy because I don't need much. When sense of comfort, I don't mind all the discomfort that comes with van life for months and living very cheaply. I don't need fancy handbags, dresses, and dinners out. So this itself can really make it way more sustainable. And I'm not the only one that maybe now it's not exactly dirt bugging like it used to be, since I coach quite a bit and work with pilots. That's evolved a little bit. But for years, it was what we would call glamorous dirt bugging and flying as much as possible and chasing the conditions. It's not also awful because, for example, van life in the Alps, it's amazing when you want to be mobile and chase the weather. So if you want to prioritize your flying, a couple of years of van life, definitely, if you can do it with your life, it's definitely not the worst choice. But again, it's not something that anyone can just pack their life in a van and do it. Some people have other obligations and other life out there that they have to compromise on. Yes. So how did you manage it? Poorly, but at the same time, happily. I'll tell you something I find interesting after a few years of van life. The more comfortable we are, the lazier we get. In general, the more we focus, I experienced it working for a big consulting company as an other side of extreme, because you work with the people who are very success driven. This work is their life and it translates into money. There's good money in it. And at the end, time is ultimate value in life. Everything else we can buy or exchange, but time, once it happens, you can't get it back. So we are basically selling our time for whatever else we are doing. This is what all the job relationships are. You are selling your time and expertise for the money. And then you buy all the things that other people around you have. Old car, you have to have a fresh one, or you can't live here, you have to live there, etc. So it creates this kind of vicious cycle of wanting more and having more. And again, if it works for you, that's fantastic. But usually it takes a lot of time. And also it puts your focus into owning and not experiencing. The simplifying things doesn't have to be as extreme as living in a van for a whole summer and spring, but simplifying things, maybe downsizing, maybe getting rid of all these external expectations and focusing on experiencing things, on maybe traveling if it's your thing, maybe your family or friends' relationships really switches the whole narrative. Suddenly you realize that you really don't need so much comfort. The discomfort that you experience, for example, when you live in the van, you get used to it. And then when you go into the mountains or run out of food, it doesn't bother you so much because you are not used to being pampered daily. We naturally, as human beings, evolved to gravitate toward comfort, food, high sugar food, and safety. This is why we have to force ourselves to go to the gym, but we don't have to force ourselves to eat another chocolate. This one comes easily. The more we in some ways, it's about going back to basics. The more we live the simpler life without this expectation that we need to own and gather more, the more it can affect our life and give us more time for things that bring us true joy, like flying and meaningful relationships. Again, everyone's different. The situation will always be different. But the more we free our life from this unnecessary ballast, and this is, again, something that everyone can weigh in their own mind, how much we want to sacrifice and how important flying is, or how important this new car or new fancy TV is for us. As long as we are honest with ourselves, and that's the only point. I think the whole conversation can be summarized as like, be honest with yourself and truly honest, how uncomfortable it may be, and whatever comes out of it, just follow it, and you can't go wrong. I'm checking this behind it.
Totally get it, and that's why I was so fascinated when we brought out the topic of honesty, because it is so hard to just live in your own bubble and make your own reality. But I think I've decoded a simpler way of putting it across to the audiences, and that is, if you can hold your horses while upgrading a new wing, or if you can make better decisions while buying that harness that you don't need, buying that radio just because everybody else is, buying that two-liner seat just because the whole paragliding population is exploding and saying we're going to buy those two-liner seats. So if you can influence these decisions, then the money is going to be much more sorted in your life.
But coming back to this reality for a moment, I would say that from what I see in the community and around me, there are two ways of successful, again, there's always Alex Rube, who has a very successful company and family. He flies 10 times per year and 200, 250, 280 kilometers in the Alps, handpicking his very best days. He can do it because he's been flying for a long time and he's a very good pilot. When you start, you can't really cheat the airtime. You need to spend time putting some groundwork in. But in general, there are two basic ways how a pilot successfully merge flying with earning a living. One is earning money through flying. So either becoming an instructor or tandem pilot, or if acro is your thing, maybe SAV instructor, maybe some XC coaching safaris. This is one way of being or becoming a professional athlete sponsored by big company. But another way of approaching it is to find a way to have the flexibility of your job that's completely not connected to flying. So either if you are in IT consulting, you're a translator or anything else that you may be doing that has some flexibility in it, or you may be landscaping, but have an agreement with your boss that if it's a really good day for flying, you can go and fly. So to having this flexibility, which I agree, it's not as easy as finding a 9-to-5 Monday to Friday job. If you can have some flexibility or work 3 days out of a week or 4 days and have a longer weekend or a flexible weekend, etc. And it comes at the cost of maybe lower pay. This is usually what makes pilots the best possible. Because let's be honest, flying professional, either flying tandems or guiding or being an instructor, is not necessarily for everyone. For some pilots, there's this very valid question: what if I make my passion my job and then I lose the passion because it's my job? And balancing it's also another question. So it's not necessarily that everyone should become a tandem pilot from now on. Big part of it is just maybe trying to find a little bit of flexibility in your life and have a little bit more time for flying. So not to be so frustrated. It's not very often, it doesn't have to be necessarily even flexibility in the sense that you work less. Very often it's just if it's possible to have some flexibility within the time frame, because then you can have a weekend on Monday, and Monday is usually for some reason the best day of the week. So yeah, I don't know if it helps, but again, it's one of these really interesting but also really broad questions that answer will be different for every pilot.
Yes, I think every question we sum up by saying you can find the answer within yourself after taking the cues from this.
It is, because there's some really hard work for flying. Like you need to learn to thermal efficiently. You need to learn weight shift. You need to learn to land in various conditions, to judge the wind, to understand the meteorology. There's a lot of things that you just need to do to be able to fly safely and successfully. But it's not the next step. It's just parallel journey where you take your flying and what truly will rule. So there's this basic groundwork that you have to do. You need to start flying away from your local hill and etc. But there's also this parallel journey that you need to find your reasons. Why is it worth it? Why do you love it? And where do you want to take it? This is one of the questions that I always ask my pilots. What's the ultimate goal? Where do you imagine yourself as a pilot in years? What type of pilot do you want to become? What truly triggers you for flying? If you can't fail and the sky is the limit, where would you like to take your flying? And it's always interesting because the answers vary heavily. So when I say that it really depends on the pilot, it's not that I'm trying to avoid answering. It truly is. And I see it again and again when I work with my pilots. They come for so many various reasons and want to do so many different things with their flying. All these reasons are absolutely valid. It's just finding your reason.
Indeed, just listening to your inner voice and then making peace with it and being honest about that to the bottom line.
And also not being afraid to reevaluate, because something that might have been super important at the beginning, few years later may cause burnout. And then you realize I loved competing, but now I don't want to compete anymore. Now I want to focus on my scenic flights or whatever, so flying tandem with my kids or anything else. And it's perfectly fine too. Not be afraid of changing it and not being too attached to the identity that we all live through different identities and wear these masks. And then we create some persona that is a successful businessman or successful parent or successful competition pilot. And then detaching from it and not being afraid to reevaluate and reinvent yourself, that's a really powerful tool to have. It requires a lot of courage and confidence, but also a lot of honesty.
I think I'm going to name the title of this show with something related to honesty, because that is what it is all about. I love the thought-provoking discussion, I think.
Awesome.
I think I would like to give our listeners a change of topic, because this is definitely a thought provocation for everybody, including me. I'm like, as you're narrating this, I'm just reevaluating my decision. Is this podcast going to work? Can I try and make a living out of paragliding in Europe? Is this going to be 6 years down the lane as well. I think to say, yeah, but being honest is the simplest answer that I'll stick to. So everything is sorted in that end. But Kinga, I want to touch upon the good side of the glorious, the glamour, the exalts, the professional photographs, the Instagram reels, the crazy music that comes with it, and all the amazing edits that make us want to be you every time when I see you through a 6-7 inch phone screen. Talk to us about the better side of being famous and rich. Does it make you richer? Or like, how does that side of
Oh, it definitely doesn't make you rich. If you want to become rich, choose another profession. Don't make flying your profession. It definitely won't make you rich.
If you can quickly touch upon how does lifestyle as a paraglider pilot change when something as big as Red Bull X Alps comes into you? How many free wings and reserves and everything else do you get?
Oh, so definitely I'm very privileged to be sponsored and supported by some paragliding companies, especially by FI paragliders, which gave me multiple wings very generously. And I absolutely love love the wings, but also the wholesomeness and the focus on details and the philosophy of the company. Harnesses by Bogdan Fly. Very cool, lightweight harnesses in different colors. Again, another little manufacturer that really listens to the feedback, and every next product, it's a better version of the previous one, which is really cool to see because a lot of big companies sometimes get settled in their groove and they get into this concept that they know everything the best. So it's really cool to collaborate with companies that listen to feedback. Hannes Papesh, who is the owner of FI and the head designer, he's been designing wings longer than my life. So he really knows what he's doing, but still he listens to feedbacks and he's always curious and he's very passionate about it. So this is something super inspiring to be a part of. Generally, gear sponsorships are super helpful. I get the gear from Intense Outdoors, little New Zealand company. I get my favorite fly-like glasses from Fluga, little Varios, super lightweight, real precise Varios from Stodeus. So this Le Bibip or Ultra Bip or Blue Bip things. This is what they make. So gear is absolutely, obviously, massive support, especially that I fly so much that I go through a lot of gear. So of course it makes a massive difference. And this is all the gear that I would buy otherwise. So it's this part is probably tricky if you want to get sponsored, how desperate you are about it. Or if you're truly desperate that you will take anything. It doesn't matter what the company is, or if you really have the comfort of working with the companies, you would support otherwise. And now they're supporting you. That's a pretty special privilege. I need to work to sustain myself. It's not that anyone is paying me for flying. Even the best pilots in the world can't fully, even Cregan doesn't fully sustain himself from sponsorships. So it just shows you how poor even some of the best and most accomplished pilots that we all look up to still need to either fly tandems, guide, or do other things to sustain themselves. This needs to be said because it's not soccer, it's not rugby, it's not sprint running, it's not an Olympic sport. It's still a pretty niche sport. If you imagine that, I will train super hard and then I will qualify to Red Bull X Alps and from now on I will live off my flying and they will pay me for adventures. No, that's not usually how it works. So, yeah, does it answer the question or?
It does partially because I wanted an honest opinion, the real opinion about what does the glamorous side look like. And I think you answered it pretty well.
So yeah, from my perspective, I absolutely love my life. I've never been happier, but it doesn't come from money. It comes from having more or less sustainable life. Again, not really needing much, but for me, the ultimate value is time. I don't want to spend my life in a cubicle now. When I retire at 65 or 70, I can do other things because I won't be capable of doing the things I'm capable of doing now. I won't get this time back. For me, the glamour comes from this. It's not the glamour of having more, having the newest gear and the fanciest entourage. Yeah, it's more about having the glamour or the real wealth. For me, is just having time for doing what I love and also sharing it with others. Because let's be honest, this work that I do with pilots, incredibly satisfying because it's about sharing. After many years of flying mountains and venturing for some wild mountains and going for some wild adventures, you can get used to it a little bit, and you have to push pretty hard to actually to get this tickle of excitement in the same way. So it doesn't happen every day. And if you work with pilots and see how much excitement the first full bivouac or the first flights through New Zealand backcountry or some other mountains, how special it is for them and how much excitement it creates. Yeah, for me, this is glamour, because this is really, I reconnect again and again how special it is and how privileged we are to be doing what we're doing, and how grateful we should all be on a daily basis for being capable of doing it. So this gratefulness or gratitude is something that I believe that if we connect to, we can be truly content. It's something that took me years of flying to connect to, but I believe that it's a true wealth, because we like to, in a modern society, we really like to measure everything with zeros in your bank account. But at the end, there's a lot of things that may be a little bit higher on your priority list, or a lot of things that don't need this extra zeros to make you happy. You know that there's a lot of research that indicates that there's particular level of wealth, which is lower than you would expect. If you get wealthier, you get happier. Because if you're constantly concerned how you're going to feed your family, how you're going to pay your rent, not to get evicted, not to get homeless, how you're going to survive until next month, of course, it creates stress. You can't be happy if you constantly struggle with basics. But above this very modest level, there's no correlation anymore. So once your basic needs are fulfilled, food and shelter, basically, and you can feed your family, anything above it, it's just indulging yourself in owning. It doesn't make you happier. Maybe we are focused on the wrong thing. We want to be happier, and we believe that this next model of car, wing, or instrument will do it for us. It will make us happier and more fulfilled. No, it will just create the spike of endorphins and dopamine that we got it, and then we'll come back to being as miserable as we were before.
Can we please solely blame this on doom scrolling on our phones? Just say yes, Kinga. I think that is the only evil eye in this whole.
It's a massive part of it. Social media, it's a massive part of it, because comparing ourselves to others is very human. This came way before social media. However, before, we were mostly comparing ourselves to our village, our neighbors, our coworkers. This is why the choice of your job and work environment is so important, because it will define what you're focusing on naturally. You can't really avoid it. But now, with social media, we compare ourselves to the whole world. Not the lives they truly live, but the lives that they want us to believe that they live. All these influencers that we compare ourselves to be living.
Oloudonese shots.
Yes, and there are this
those
massive
acro maneuvers over crystal clear blue waters and all of that.
Absolutely. I said with paragliding, it's pretty wild, because I see it a lot when I teach my pilots top landings. Top landings are one of the most crucial skills when you want to go booty flying. However, top landings in the mountains require a lot of patience. It's not only about your skills, about flying your wing, but also about understanding that thermals can trigger off the mountain, and they come in cycles. So you may come perfectly into your top landing, exactly how I did 5 minutes ago, and you are doing exactly the same thing, but now you just got lifted by a thermal, and fighting it makes no sense. So you just fly away and try again. And very often in the real big mountains, it can take an hour easily to top land if it's still early in the day. And it's completely fine, but very often pilots come with this image that top landing should be what they saw on a 10-second reel, that you just come perfectly on the speed bar into the slope and you land perfectly. Everything is just super smooth and super perfect. And they imagine that this is how it works. But real life doesn't work like this. Even for the top pilots, they show on their reels the best moments of the best landings, let's say. So there's something to keep in mind. What we see out there isn't real, or it's a part of reality, the pinnacle, the very top of reality. And this is why also sharing a little mishaps and various other aspects, it's so important. But again, it doesn't sell so well within 10-second reel. So it doesn't get as many views, doesn't create as much frenzy. So maybe even if someone wants to share it, maybe you won't even see it. So just something to remember. And it's Yeah, that's just cliche, but something to remember that social media, it's not reality. It's just a tiny best of the best moments of reality.
Yeah. And I think as a creator, this is a paradox that everybody fights. Do I go in for views or do I go in for creating unfiltered value with my audience? But the point is, this can totally resonate to any business, which is, do I go in for community or do I go in for just profiteering? And I think doing your own part is the answer here. That I of course have to sustain myself in a capitalist society, which there are some rules that I have to stick by, but at least I'm doing my own part in trying to keep it as clean or as real or as honest as possible. And then like let the algorithms do whatever, let the universe do whatever it takes, but at least your own conscience is allowing you to go ahead and sleep with a peaceful mind because you put out reality rather than just a 10-second.
Oh, absolutely. You totally can create value and still get views. I'm not such a social media titan, to be honest. It's not main focus of my life. But of course, I appreciate that I went for this cool adventure and have this beautiful footage. Why not share it with the world? It's a little different if you try to be a full-time creator and your livelihood is dependent on views. So I guess it's really, again, depends what do you want from it. I just always wanted to share a bit of what all this flying is about and how pretty it is. Sometimes when I like to record my flying, especially when you do something intense, you're so focused on not to putting yourself in some site on the gorge and bombing out in the middle of nowhere, but that you don't really look around as much as you could. Then you look at the footage and you're like, wow, that's absolutely gorgeous what we do out there. Sometimes you have all the time, you're nice and high and you have all the time to admire the views, but sometimes it gets pretty intense. And then you look at this glacier, look at this place. One reason to record it for me is to be able to come back to it, not only now, but also when I'm old and crippled and I can't fly anymore. Oh, I lived a good life flying these beautiful places. But then also being able to share it with people.
Collecting bragging rights for life with all the GoPro and Insta360 footages that you're making.
Collecting memories to come back to.
Yeah, but I think for any aspiring creators listening to this, let me just point out that your fellow Kiwi pilot, Benjamin Kellett, was kind enough to come on the show as well a couple of episodes before. And he happened to share a reserve throw in the most raw manner possible. I was just amazed by the honesty that he had. He was like, all right, 365 days my life looks like that. But then here is one day, which I'm not going to hide. And people did respond very well to it. And they were pretty happy with whatever.
Yes. Ben is a pilot who's not only a very good pilot, has been chasing it pretty hard and has a massive passion for flying, but also he found this beautiful niche of truly talking and talking things through when he flies. Most of his followers are not even pilots. They're just people on the internet who find it fascinating that he can fly from mountain to mountain. And you may think a lot of us do it. Yeah, but not a lot of us show it to the world in such a unique way and perspective. So it's pretty cool to see. And I think his following is and his success on the social media platforms. I know how much work and time he puts into it. So it's totally deserved. It's amazing to see that it's happening for him. Yeah.
There's one saying that we have at Paragliding Atlas. So stay tuned, stay excited, because the magic is just getting started. So I think that applies here. Kinga, before we close, any one flight that you feel like sharing that has stayed with you in past 4,000 hours? Let me repeat that to my audience. 4,000 hours of airtime, man. That is fascinating to hear. But if there's any one flight that you can share the experience, we'll be very thankful.
As you can imagine, I have dozens of flights that emotionally touched me or feel unforgettable, and they were very special. But there are also milestones that you remember after years that changed something. My first thermal, obviously, was something deeply emotional that healed my heart and changed my life. My first time I did Tour de Mont Blanc was a very special flight because I went to Chamonix again. My first year of flying, still dealing with a lot of anxiety and decision-making, questioning myself all the time. I went to Chamonix. It was a very good day, very heat wave. And there was a lot of pilots who wanted to try, back then it was still possible to top land on Mont Blanc, who wanted to fly in the massive. I didn't even think about it because I thought it's beyond my capacity at this point. So I wanted to fly a triangle to Annecy that someone showed me once, and I wanted to do it. But then I met a friend of mine, Oliver, who, by the way, came here just this month to New Zealand to fly. And I this time showed him around my playground, which was pretty special. After 10 years, pretty special closing circle. He's been flying there for many years in Chamonix. And he asked me what I want to do. I want to fly to Annecy. I was like, that's the day to go into the massif, go into the mountains. So off I went. And I went toward the massif. To make long story short, I did Tour de Mont Blanc in the anti-clockwise direction. No one does it like this. When I landed back in the valley, I was just like, I didn't even know what happened. And Oliver asked me, what did you do? I was like, I think I did Tour de Mont Blanc, but to the left. I was like, impossible. No one doesn't think this. I was like, I guess I did. And in particular, because I did it this way, on the way, there's Col de Miage, which is pretty high alpine pass, that takes you to the Italian side. If you do it in a normal way, like every other reasonable pilot, you not only follow the sun and it's more kind of natural flow, but also you get to the Miage Glacier and the Col de Miage, so the very high alpine commuting terrain, in the afternoon when the day is already well developed and you understand the quality of the day. You only commit if it's truly great. I did the other way around. So I just sneaked over the Col de Miage and using just a little bit of convergence, just waving like crazy to people sitting on the pass. There's a refugia there. And then I just slided into the other side and then saw the glacier that you're not crossing like in some other situation, but you're going along it. And I looked back, the pass was already above me because I sunk a little bit. I was like, now let's put the seat in the upward position. The jokes are over. Now we're getting serious. Very carefully, with the full focus, I flew around the whole massif. And it was the first time that I flew over the terrain that could be potentially dangerous terrain. And the first time I connected to the fact that it's not only that we can fly along the valleys and the green pastures below, but also we can fly this piece of cloth over terrain that would be impossible or very difficult to access otherwise. And flying above glaciers until now, it's one of my biggest joys and biggest privileges in flying. This is one of the things that cloud surfing and flying above glaciers is basically two things that I absolutely love about flying. So that really expanded my horizon about flying and opened my eyes to what this piece of cloth can do, that you can actually fly so much more interesting terrain that I thought until this point. And there was also another flight that changed something dramatically in me. When I came to New Zealand, I only flew in Europe at this point and China and in Australia, but this is basically flatland flying over dusty paddocks. Sorry for all the Aussies listening, but because there's no real mountains there, it's not exactly my type of flying. I know that there's amazing distance potential flying in the desert and some really cool coastal soaring. I'm gravitating naturally toward the mountains. This is my environment. And the higher, the better, the wilder, the better. I really didn't have an experience at this point when I came first to New Zealand with the wild mountains. When I went for my first flight in New Zealand, I saw this vast mountains in front of me without any roads, houses, cows, power lines, anything, no civilization signs. It really scared me in a weird way, but also triggered something deep in my heart. From the very first moment, I thought it would be so amazing to get to the point when I can travel through these mountains alone, self-sufficient, and without fear. And it was 10 years ago. Times have changed. The sport here really developed, but back then no one was really doing it. No one was really flying backcountry. Everybody were more or less following the road. There was only two pilots, Brian Moore and Nick Nanens. None of them flies anymore. They both had serious accidents, which is a dark side of our sport. Back then no one really did it, so it really felt even more remote, more wild, and more committing. And it took me 2 years, but 2 years later, I went for my first big Volbivac expedition. I went solo through the mountains for 16 days, but just above 2 weeks. That was one of these deeply life-changing experiences because anything that I had to process, anything that I had to hear from my inner voice, I had enough time to hear it. I felt very vulnerable out there because it still scared me. Actually, on the third day, because on this first day I got lost. On the second day, I flew some heroic 20 kilometers, put myself on the lee side and got completely freaked out. But on the third day, after a lot of processing and crying and an emotional journey, I flew a stunning 180-kilometer line deep through the Southern Alps. And it was something that I dreamt about. I looked at this line and I thought about it, but I never really thought seriously that it would happen. And I put myself out there deep. Until now, it makes emotional, actually, because I remember who I was when I was planning this journey, when I was going for this adventure. And I also remember what it made me and who I was when I came out and what, as a result, I am right now and how I fly these mountains now, how I treat it as my playground. And I feel like, I'm not coming back for dinner tonight. And I just on purpose put myself somewhere deep and then spend the next day or two getting out. I have a completely different approach to flying and to mountains in general. But of course, this is, again, thousands of hours later. Back then, it was the flight, this 183 kilometers, the second overall longest flight after Nick's national record in New Zealand. I didn't see a soul. No one was flying backcountry to this extent. It took everything I had, everything I was as a pilot. All the skills, all the mindset, all the focus, all the commitment that I had. And after those 16 days in the mountains, when I finally got out, I lost almost 5 kilograms and was pretty exhausted altogether. But I came out as a completely different human, not only different pilot, different human. So in various ways, yeah, it was life-changing. And until now, it's one of my most cherished flights and most special. And it's absolutely stunning. So there's a YouTube video that's called A Girl Gone Wild, which is basically a vlog of this journey and some of the images also from this flight and the whole aspect of being in the mountains alone for so long. So it was quite an emotional journey. This one, in particular, this flight will always stay with me. So it always tells me that at the end, kilometers are just numbers, and what truly stays with you are all the emotions. And when you push and dream about something big and make it happen and grasp it and commit to it and don't hold back, and then truly find your flow and fly to the maximum of your capacity and touch who you are and what you're capable of. So this is what flying can do to us. And when it happens, it's always pure magic.
Golden words, Kinga, golden words. It's just music listening to you speak your heart out.
It's about who you are, what you want, where you come from, what's maybe holding you back and what drives you. I think we all should give ourselves this privilege of being alone with our mind. And it doesn't have to be 2 weeks. Not everyone has this luxury or commitment to do it, but a few hours a day, a weekend, and some time to reset, not by scrolling, not even by reading and relaxing. Just reset with your mind and really check on ourselves. What do we want and what's important, who we are and where we are going. But usually the most interesting things happen on the edge of our comfort and where we are uncomfortable. Especially there's one aspect of it about safety. If the conditions make us uncomfortable and it's really turbulent, windy or whatever, that's one thing of looking at it. This is not a safety aspect. If it's an aspect of commitment or discomfort, it's not that I don't want to go there because it's dangerous and it's the universe. It really sounds cliche, and I'm not the first person saying it. It's just some deep truth in it. And this is also why this particular flight was so important and this particular journey was so important, because it pushed me so far outside of my comfort zone. Since then, I've been flying way more committing flights, way deeper in worse conditions. I've been alone in some wild mountains and I never cried again, if it makes sense. It never touched me to this point. Once I came out on the other end of this journey, something just ticked and it was very emotional, but also very empowering. Sometimes the flights are not about kilometers or winning anything, or not even necessarily about the best conditions. Sometimes are the flights that are the ones that push us the most and make us go for journeys. No.
Indeed. And I think the only bad thing about this podcast is that it has to come to an end at some point.
You really pushed it way past. I think you will need to cut it. You have to cut it out or make it into 2 episodes, because we are almost getting to 2.5 hours. When I start talking about flying, it's hard to stop. Whatever hasn't been said, we can always do it again sometime in the future and talk about some other aspects we didn't address this time.
Indeed. And there's no way 1-2 podcast episodes can do justice to the amount of wealth of knowledge that you have and the willingness to share that you have, most importantly. Let me point that out. And on that note, I would also like to say that as somebody who's seeking guidance, we might go out and chase instructors who have a lot of experience, But we often forget about chasing instructors who have the willingness to share. So from what I see, that you have one of the most willing personalities out there to share your knowledge with others. So for anybody out there who's looking to level up their flying, head out to Kinga's website. The link to which be in the show notes below, and all the awesomeness that you heard here in the show will be there live and exclusive in person for you if you want it in your life.
Thank you for this promotion, Aninder. That's very kind.
Just trying to bring out the brutal honesty and make the community a better place for everyone, not just for us.
At the end, as much as it's a solitary sport and I'm a bit of a loner when it comes to flying, I like to fly alone. There's particular magic about sharing knowledge and what you learn on the way, because I learned so much from other pilots on the way. It only feels right to, if you have something to give it back to the community to keep us all safer and happier. It's in our own interest to have happy and healthy and big community of pilots who share the same passion. Paragliding is still such a young and niche sport. Anything that we can do to make it safer and more satisfying for pilots, we should do it. I think it's our moral duty to do it.
I'm so glad I'm doing my own bit with the show, and you are doing.
Absolutely. And you're doing amazing job also sharing this talk about flying and talking about all this aspect of flying with various experienced pilots. So yeah, we all do our little bit. Yeah.
On that note, Kinga, it's been an absolute blessing and an honor to you. And until next time, cannot wait.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for having me, Anne, in there. And fly high, stay safe, everybody.